My name is Eleanor. I am 66 years old, and what I am about to tell you changed my life forever. The funeral of my husband, Arthur, was the quietest day of my existence. There, beside his grave, I received a text from an unknown number that chilled me to the bone. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket," I replied, trembling. "Who is this?" The answer left me breathless. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." That moment split my soul in two. My world crumbled as I looked at Julian and Leo, my own sons, standing beside the coffin with strangely calm expressions. Something wasn't right. Their tears seemed forced, their hugs as cold as ice. For 42 years, Arthur had been my partner, my refuge, my reason for living. I met him when I was 24 in the town of Harmony Creek, where we both grew up among dusty streets and modest dreams. I worked cleaning houses to support my sick mother, while Arthur repaired bicycles in a small shop inherited from his father. We were poor, but we were happy. We had something that money can't buy: true love. I remember the first time he spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning. I was walking to the market in my faded green dress and worn-out shoes. He came out of his shop, his hands stained with grease, and smiled at me with a shyness that I fell in love with from the very first moment. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said in a soft voice. "Do you need me to take a look at your bike?" I didn't have a bicycle, but I made up an excuse just to talk to him. That conversation turned into dates under the big maple tree in Central Park, then into promises of eternal love, and finally, into a humble wedding filled with hope. The first few years were hard. We lived in a 2-bedroom house with a tin roof. When it rained, we'd place pots all over the house to catch the leaks. But we were happy. Arthur worked from sunup to sundown in his shop. I sewed clothes for the ladies in town. When Julian was born, I thought my heart would burst with happiness. He was a beautiful baby, with his father's big eyes and my smile. 2 years later, Leo arrived, just as perfect. I raised them with all the love in the world, sacrificing my own needs for theirs. Arthur was a wonderful father. He took them fishing in the creek on Sundays, taught them how to fix things with their own hands, and told them stories before they went to sleep. I fed them, clothed them, and comforted them when they cried. We were a close-knit family, or so I believed. As they grew up, things began to change. Julian, the older one, was always ambitious. From a young age, he would ask why we lived so modestly, why we didn't have a car like other families. Leo followed him in everything, as he always had. When Julian turned 18, Arthur offered him a job at the shop, but he refused it with contempt. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." Those words deeply wounded Arthur, though he never told me. I would see him at night, sitting on the porch, looking at the stars with sadness. His son had rejected not only his job, but his entire way of life. The years passed, and surprisingly, Julian managed to make his way in the business world. He got a job at a real estate firm in Street Louis. Leo followed him shortly after. They both started making money, much more than Arthur and I had ever seen. At first, I was proud. My sons had achieved what we never could, escaping poverty, having a better life. But slowly, that joy turned to sadness. The visits became less frequent, the calls shorter. When they did come to see us, they arrived in luxury cars, dressed in expensive suits, talking about investments and properties. They looked at us with a strange mixture of pity and shame. "Mom," Julian would say during one of his sporadic visits, "you should move to a better place. This house is falling apart." He was right, but that house held all our memories. It was where we had raised our children, where we had shared thousands of meals, where we had grown old together. It wasn't fancy, but it was our home. Arthur, always wise, would tell me, "Eleanor, money has changed our sons. We're not enough for them anymore." I resisted believing it. I kept justifying their absences, their brief calls, their broken promises. "They're busy building their lives," I would tell myself. "Someday they'll go back to being the loving boys we raised." But deep in my heart, I knew Arthur was right. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. I just didn't know yet to what extent we were strangers to them. The most drastic change came when Julian married Genevieve, a woman from the city who never hid her disdain for our simple lifestyle. The first time he brought her home, she arrived in high heels that sank into the dirt path in our yard, wearing a chic red dress that looked more expensive than anything I had ever worn in my life. "A pleasure," she said with a forced smile, extending only the tips of her fingers to greet me. Her eyes scanned our humble home with an expression I couldn't decipher, but it made me feel small. During dinner, Genevieve barely touched the food I had prepared with so much love. She pushed the green beans around on her plate, cut tiny pieces of chicken, but hardly ate a thing. Julian seemed nervous, constantly apologizing for things that had never embarrassed him before. "Next time, we'll take them to a restaurant," he whispered to Genevieve, thinking I couldn't hear him. But I heard. Every word stabbed my heart like a knife. Leo, for his part, remained single but adopted the same distant attitude as his brother. His visits were limited to special occasions, and even then, he always seemed to be in a hurry to leave. He was constantly on his phone, closing deals even during our conversations. "Mom, I have to go," he would always say before it was time. "I have an important meeting early tomorrow." Family Sundays became a distant memory. Christmases turned cold and formal. My sons would bring expensive gifts we didn't need, stay for 2 or 3 hours, and leave with obvious relief. Arthur and I grew old alone, comforting each other. He kept working in his shop, though his hands no longer had the same strength. I continued with my sewing, but my eyes weren't the same either. We managed on our small income, proud that we never asked our successful sons for anything. "You know what the saddest part is, Eleanor?" Arthur said to me one night as we drank coffee on the porch. "It's not that they have money, it's that the money has made them believe we are less important." He was right, as always. My sons hadn't just changed financially, they had changed in their hearts. We were no longer their beloved parents. We were an inconvenient reminder of a past they wanted to forget. Things got worse when Julian bought a $200,000 house in an exclusive neighborhood in the city. Leo did the same shortly after, investing in a luxury apartment that cost $150,000. Suddenly, our sons were owners of fortunes we couldn't even imagine. "You should sell this house and move into a nursing home," Genevieve suggested during one of her rare visits. "There are some very nice places for people your age. You'd be more comfortable." The words, nursing home, hit me like a slap. A nursing home? After 40 years of building our home, after raising these sons with so much love, they wanted to send us to a nursing home? "We don't need a nursing home," Arthur replied with the dignity that always characterized him. "We're fine here, in our house." But I saw the expression on Julian's and Leo's faces. They supported Genevieve's idea. To them, we were a burden, a problem to be solved in the most convenient way possible. That's when the more direct suggestions began. Julian arrived one day with papers in his hand, documents he had prepared without consulting us. "Dad, Mom," he said with that fake smile he had perfected, "I've been thinking about your future. This house is worth $15,000 at most. If you sell it, I can add some money so you can move to a better place." A better place? For us, there was no better place than the home where we had been happy for decades. But Julian didn't understand that. For him, everything came down to numbers, to monetary value. "Besides," he continued, "I think Dad should retire from the shop. He's 70 years old already. It's time to rest." Arthur looked at him with infinite sadness. "Son, work isn't a burden for me. It's what keeps me alive, what gives my days meaning." "But you could get hurt," Leo insisted, backing his brother as always. "At your age, an accident would be very dangerous." His words sounded concerned, but I sensed something else behind them. An impatience, an urgency I couldn't quite understand. The following months were tense. My sons increased the pressure on us to sell the house. They brought real estate agents over without telling us, did appraisals without our permission, and even started talking about what would be best for everyone. "Look," Julian told us during a particularly uncomfortable dinner, "Genevieve and I have decided to have children soon. We'll need help with the expenses. If you sell the house and move somewhere smaller, that money could be an early inheritance." An early inheritance? Was he asking for our inheritance while we were still alive? The audacity of the request left me speechless. Arthur remained calm, but I saw his jaw tighten. "Son, when your mother and I pass away, everything we have will be for you. But as long as we're alive, our decisions are our own. Don't be stubborn, Leo chimed in with a harshness I'd never heard from him before. You're old. You can't keep living in the past. That night, after they left, Arthur and I stayed up talking until dawn. For the first time in our marriage, we discussed the possibility that our sons were not the people we thought we had raised. Something is wrong, Eleanor, my husband told me, with a worry I had never seen in his eyes before. This isn't just ambition or impatience. There's something darker behind all this pressure. I didn't know how deeply accurate his words were. I didn't imagine that my own sons were planning something that would change our lives forever. I didn't know that the tragedy to come would not be an accident of fate, but a carefully orchestrated conspiracy by the two people I trusted most in the world. The last normal conversation I had with Julian was 3 weeks before Arthur's death. He came alone, without Genevieve, with a more serious expression than usual. "Mom," he said, sitting at the kitchen table where he had eaten breakfast so many times as a child, "I want you to know that, no matter what happens, Leo and I will always take care of you." His words reassured me at the time, but now, remembering them beside Arthur's grave, they send shivers down my spine. Why did he say no matter what happens? What did he know that I didn't? The accident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Arthur had left early for the shop, as he did every day for over 40 years. I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite lunch, pot roast and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang with an urgency that froze my blood. "Is this Mrs. Eleanor?" a strange voice asked. "This is General Hospital. Your husband has had a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The words blurred in my mind like ink in water. The world stopped. My legs turned to jelly, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. What happened? Is he okay? Is he alive? "He's in intensive care, ma'am." "Please, come as soon as you can." The trip to the hospital was a blurry nightmare. My neighbor Sadie had to drive me because I was shaking so much I couldn't even hold the keys. The whole way, my mind refused to process what was happening. Arthur was careful, meticulous in his work. How could this have happened? When we arrived at the hospital, Julian and Leo were already there. That struck me as odd, because no one had called them yet, at least not me, but in my desperation, I didn't give the detail much thought. "Mom," Julian said, hugging me with a force that felt genuine. "Dad is in bad shape. The doctors say one of the machines at the shop exploded. He has severe burns and head trauma." Leo's eyes were red, but something in his expression seemed strange. He looked more nervous than sad, like someone waiting for important news rather than someone grieving for his father. "Can we see him?" I asked desperately. "Only immediate family, one at a time, and for 5 minutes max," the nurse explained. When I entered that intensive care room, my heart sank. Arthur was connected to a dozen machines, with bandages covering much of his face and arms. I barely recognized him. His breathing was labored, artificial, maintained by constantly beeping devices. I approached his bed and took his hand, the only part of his body that seemed untouched. "Arthur, my love, I'm here. Everything is going to be okay. You're going to recover, just like you always do." For a moment I felt him lightly squeeze my hand. His eyes moved behind his closed eyelids. He was fighting. My warrior was fighting to come back to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I practically lived at the hospital, sleeping on the uncomfortable chairs in the waiting room. Julian and Leo took turns keeping me company, but they always seemed more interested in talking to the doctors than in comforting their father. I overheard fragmented conversations that I couldn't fully understand at the time. Leo asking about health insurance, about the costs of treatment. Julian on the phone, talking about life insurance policies and beneficiaries. "Mom," Julian told me on the second day, "we've reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a $50,000 life insurance policy. There's also a work accident policy that could cover up to $75,000 more." Why was he talking to me about money when Arthur was still fighting for his life? Why was he worried about insurance instead of his father's recovery? "I don't care about the money," I answered harshly. "I just want your father to get better." "Of course, Mom," he said, but I saw something in his eyes I didn't like. A coldness, a calculation at work while his father was dying. On the third day, the doctors gave us the most devastating news of my life. Dr. Evans, an older man with a compassionate expression, gathered us in a small office. "Mrs. Eleanor," he began in a gentle voice, "your husband's condition is critical. The burns have become infected, and the head trauma is more severe than we initially thought. We need to be realistic about his chances." "What does that mean?" I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. "It means we must prepare for the worst. Your husband is in a medically induced coma. We could keep him alive indefinitely, but his quality of life, well, it's very unlikely he will ever regain consciousness." The world crumbled around me. 42 years of marriage, a whole life built together, and now they were telling me it was fading away like smoke. "We want to try everything," I said through sobs. "No matter the cost, no matter how long it takes." But Julian exchanged a look with Leo that deeply unsettled me. "Mom," Julian said, in a voice trying to sound sympathetic, "we have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden to anyone." "A burden?" I exploded with a fury I didn't know I had. "He's your father. He's not a burden. He's the man who raised you, who worked his whole life to give you the best." "We know, Mom," Leo intervened. "But we also have to think about you. The medical expenses are going to be enormous. They could wipe out all your savings. Again, the money. Always the money. My husband was dying, and they were calculating costs. That night, alone in the hospital room, I held Arthur's hand and spoke to him as if he could hear me. "My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine my life without you." It was then that something happened that still gives me goosebumps. His fingers moved slightly, squeezing mine with an almost imperceptible strength. His lips moved as if he were trying to say something, but no sound came out. I desperately called the nurses. "He's responding. He's trying to talk." But by the time they arrived, Arthur had returned to his previous state. The nurse checked the monitors and shook her head. "Sometimes involuntary muscle spasms occur, ma'am. It doesn't mean he's conscious." But I knew what I had felt. Arthur had tried to communicate with me. He had fought to tell me something important. 2 days later, in the early hours of Friday morning, the machine's alarms blared. The lights flashed, nurses rushed toward Arthur's room. I was dozing in the hallway when the commotion woke me. "No, no, no!" I screamed, running toward the room. The doctors worked for 40 minutes trying to resuscitate him, but it was useless. At 4:37 in the morning, Arthur was officially declared dead. The pain I felt in that moment was physical, as if my heart had been ripped from my chest. I collapsed beside his bed, hugging his still warm body, refusing to accept that he was gone forever. Julian and Leo arrived at the hospital an hour after their father's death. They seemed prepared, as if they had been waiting for the call. They brought papers, documents, phone numbers for funeral homes. "We've already spoken with the Harmony Creek Funeral Home," Julian told me while I was still crying inconsolably. "They can pick up the body this morning." "We also contacted the insurance company," Leo added. "The claims process has already been started." How could they be so efficient, so organized, so cold, just an hour after losing their father? Something wasn't right, but my grief was so intense that I couldn't think clearly. The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. Julian handled all the arrangements without really consulting me. He chose the simplest casket, the briefest ceremony, as if he wanted to get it all over with as quickly as possible. "It's what Dad would have wanted," he told me when I confronted him for not including me in the decisions. "Something simple, without any fuss." But Arthur deserved better than this indecent rush to bury him and forget him. The day of the funeral was overcast and cold, as if the sky itself was weeping for Arthur. I wore my only black dress, the same one I had worn to my mother's funeral years ago. My hands were shaking so much that Sadie had to help me with the small buttons on the back. "Be strong, Eleanor," my dear friend whispered as she carefully combed my hair. "Arthur would want to see you strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt empty, like a shell without a soul. 42 years of marriage cannot be buried so easily. Every object in the house reminded me of him. His coffee mug on the table, his tools in the yard, his pillow that still held his scent. When we arrived at the cemetery, I was surprised by how few people had attended. I expected to see more of Arthur's friends from the shop, more neighbors, more acquaintances. But it was just Julian, Leo, Genevieve, Sadie, me, and the pastor. For a man who had lived 70 years in the same town, who had helped so many people, the funeral seemed strangely empty. "Where are the people from the shop?" I asked Julian. "We didn't want to bother anyone," he replied quickly. "Dad was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate. But that wasn't true. Arthur loved his community. He cared about his neighbors. He would have wanted them to come say goodbye. Why had Julian decided to make everything so secret, so rushed? During the ceremony, I watched my sons with a strange emotional disconnect. Julian wore a solemn, appropriate expression, but his eyes constantly flickered to his watch. Leo seemed restless, as if he had more important things to do. Genevieve was discreetly checking her phone behind her black veil. Was this how they said goodbye to their father? With impatience and distractions? The pastor spoke of eternal life, of well-deserved rest, of reuniting with God. His words felt hollow in my shattered heart. I didn't want Arthur to rest in peace. I wanted him to come home with me, to continue growing old together, to keep drinking coffee on the porch every evening. When it was time to throw dirt on the casket, my legs refused to hold me up. Sadie had to support me as I sobbed uncontrollably. The sound of the dirt hitting the wood was final, definitive, hopeless. It was at that exact moment, standing by my husband's grave, that my phone vibrated, a text message from an unknown number. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." My heart stopped. The letters danced before my eyes, as if they were a hallucination. Was I losing my mind from grief? With trembling hands, I replied, "Who is this?" The answer came immediately. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone fell from my hands as if it were on fire. Sadie bent down to pick it up, but I stopped her abruptly. I couldn't let anyone else see those messages. Not until I understood what was happening. "Are you okay, Mom?" Julian asked, approaching with a concerned expression. I looked at him intently, trying to find some clue in his face. His eyes seemed sincere, but now, every gesture, every word, every expression felt suspicious. "I'm fine," I lied, putting the phone back in my purse. I need to go home." During the ride back, I couldn't get those messages out of my mind. Was it possible someone was playing a cruel joke at the worst moment of my life? Or was there really a possibility that Arthur was alive? But if he was alive, who had we just buried? And if he wasn't alive, who knew enough details about our lives to write something so specific about our sons? That night, alone in my house that now felt like a mausoleum, I reviewed every detail of the past few days. Arthur's accident had been strange from the beginning. According to Julian, a machine had exploded at the shop, but Arthur knew every screw, every wire in that place. He was meticulous about maintenance, obsessive about safety. Besides, how had my sons gotten to the hospital so quickly if no one had notified them? The hospital had called me first. I was the emergency contact. How did they know about the accident before me? And then there was the issue of money. From day one, Julian and Leo had talked about insurance, policies, beneficiaries, as if they had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. I decided to go through Arthur's papers. In his old wooden desk, he kept all the important documents in a metal box. Insurance policies, the deed to the house, papers for the shop, everything was there. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy Julian had mentioned. But there was something I didn't remember. The policy had been updated just 6 months ago, increasing the coverage from $25,000 to $50,000. Why had Arthur increased his life insurance? He had never mentioned this change to me. And more importantly, who had suggested he do it? I kept looking and found something even more disturbing. A workplace accident insurance policy I knew nothing about, taken out just 2 months before his death. $75,000 in case of death by accident at work. $125,000 in total. A fortune for a family like ours, but also a fortune tempting enough for someone without scruples. My phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. "Check the bank account. See who's been moving money." This time, I didn't hesitate. This person, whoever they were, knew too much to be a prankster. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew details that only someone very close to us could know. The next day, I went to the bank where Arthur and I had our account for 30 years. Mrs. Davis, the manager who had known us forever, greeted me with sincere condolences. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry about Arthur. He was a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Davis. I'm here to review our accounts. I need to understand our financial situation." She showed me the statements for the last 6 months. What I saw left me frozen. Over the last 3 months, significant withdrawals had been made from our savings account. $5,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March. Money that I had no idea had been moved. "Who authorized these withdrawals?" I asked with a trembling voice. "Your husband came in person," Mrs. Davis explained. "He said he needed the money for repairs at the shop, but I handled the household finances. I knew exactly how much money we had and how much we spent. Arthur had never mentioned costly repairs at the shop, and we had definitely never discussed withdrawing $12,000 from our savings. "Do you have the signatures for these withdrawals?" I asked. She showed me the slips. It certainly looked like Arthur's signature, but something about the handwriting seemed off, too shaky, too uncertain for his usually firm, clear hand. "Mrs. Davis," I asked, my heart pounding. "Did he come alone to make these withdrawals, or was someone with him?" She thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, I think once or twice he came with one of your sons. Julian, I believe. He said he was helping with the paperwork because Arthur had trouble reading the documents without his glasses. Julian. My son had been involved in money withdrawals I knew nothing about, using his father's tired eyes as an excuse. But Arthur saw perfectly fine with his glasses, which he never took off during the day. That afternoon, as I looked over the bank slips again and again, I received another message. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Arthur he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. I could no longer deny the evidence piling up in front of me. The mysteriously increased insurance policies, the unauthorized money withdrawals, Julian's presence in transactions I was unaware of, his suspicious efficiency in organizing the funeral, his coldness during his father's final moments. But the question that terrified me was, if they had really planned Arthur's death, how had they done it? And who was the person sending me these messages? How did they know so much about what had happened? The following days turned into a nightmare of doubt and suspicion. Every smile from Julian, every hug from Leo, every word of condolence felt like a mask hiding something sinister. But I needed more proof before I could accept a truth as horrifying as the one forming in my mind. My phone kept receiving messages from the mysterious number. "Go to Arthur's shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see." I decided to go to the shop for the first time since the accident. Julian had said a machine exploded, but when I got there, I found something completely different from what I expected. The shop was strangely clean. Too clean to have been the scene of an explosion. There were no scorch marks on the walls, no debris, no signs of the destruction that such a serious accident should have caused. "Where's the machine that exploded?" I wondered aloud. I searched the entire shop and found all the machines in their places, working perfectly. The welder, the compressor, the power, saw all of them were intact. So what had been the cause of the accident? In Arthur's desk, I found something that made my blood run cold. A note in his handwriting, dated 3 days before his death. "Julian insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Eleanor, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions." Below that note, there was another. "Leo brought me some papers to sign. He says they're to modernize the shop, but I don't understand what it's about. Why such a rush?" My husband had been suspicious. He had sensed that something wasn't right with our son's behavior, but he had died before he could tell me. I kept searching and found a sealed envelope with my name on it. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a letter from Arthur. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. In recent months, I've noticed strange changes in Julian and Leo. They are too interested in our money, in the insurance, in us selling the house. Genevieve is putting a lot of pressure on them. Yesterday, Julian told me I should be more concerned about my safety, because at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but those words sounded like a threat. I love you, Eleanor. If something happens to me, don't blindly trust anyone, not even our sons." The letter fell from my hands. Arthur had foreseen his own death. He had seen the signs that I, blinded by motherly love, had ignored. That evening, Julian came to visit. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile that now seemed completely fake. "Mom, I've been thinking about your future," he said, pouring himself a glass without asking if I wanted one. "The insurance money is already being processed. It will be $125,000. "How do you know the exact amount?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Well, I helped Dad with the insurance paperwork. He wanted to make sure you had enough money to live comfortably." A lie. Arthur had never wanted to increase the insurance. According to his own note, he had been pressured by Julian. "And what do you think I should do with that money?" I asked, carefully watching his reaction. His eyes lit up with a glint that gave me chills. "You could buy a smaller, more comfortable house. Or better yet, move into a good nursing home where you'll have company and medical care. Leo and I could manage your money to make it grow. Manage my money. We just want to take care of you, Mom. At your age, it's easy to get scammed or make bad financial decisions. We know about investments, about business. We could triple that amount in a few years. Triple my money, or make it disappear into their own pockets. Let me think about it," I told him. That night, I received another message. "Tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the report on Arthur's accident. There are contradictions you need to know about." The next day, I went to the local police station. Sergeant Miller, who had known Arthur for years, greeted me kindly. "The report on my husband's accident?" I asked with a confused expression. "Which accident, Mrs. Eleanor?" "The one at his shop." When the machine exploded, the sergeant checked his files and shook his head. "We have no report of an explosion at Arthur's shop here. In fact, we have no report of a workplace accident involving your husband at all." I felt the world sway beneath my feet. But my son said it was an accident at the shop. That's why he was in the hospital." "Mrs. Eleanor, your husband arrived at the hospital on Tuesday morning, but not because of a workplace accident. According to the medical report I have here, he arrived unconscious with symptoms of poisoning. Poisoning. The doctors found traces of methanol in his blood, an amount sufficient to cause blindness, brain damage, and eventually death. The hospital should have informed you of this. Poisoning. It hadn't been an explosion. It hadn't been a workplace accident. Someone had deliberately poisoned my husband. Why didn't anyone tell me this? I asked, my voice breaking. The immediate family members who signed the hospital papers requested that the information be kept confidential to avoid unnecessary speculation. They said you were too emotionally fragile to handle the technical details. Immediate family members, Julian and Leo. They had hidden the true cause of Arthur's condition, invented the story of the explosion, and manipulated everyone, including me, to cover up a murder. Mrs. Eleanor, the sergeant continued, if you have suspicions about the circumstances of your husband's death, we could open a formal investigation. I had more than suspicions. I was certain that my own sons had murdered their father for money. That afternoon, Leo came to the house with a bouquet of flowers and the same fake smile as Julian. How are you, Mom? You look tired. I'm fine, I lied, watching his every move with a new perspective. Just thinking about the future. It's good that you're thinking about that. Julian and I have been talking. We think you should sell the house soon while the real estate market is fresh. Why the rush? Well, old houses lose value quickly, and you need the cash. The funeral expenses, the outstanding medical bills. More lies. The funeral had been cheap, almost insultingly so. And there were no outstanding medical bills because the hospital insurance had covered them. Leo, I said, looking him straight in the eye, you knew your father didn't die from a workplace accident. For a fraction of a second, I saw panic in his expression, but he recovered quickly. What are you talking about, Mom? I went to the police station. There's no report of an explosion at your dad's shop. This time, the panic was more evident. Mom, you shouldn't be doing these things. They'll confuse you. The grief is affecting you. Is the grief affecting me, or have you both been lying to me? He stood up abruptly, spilling the coffee I had served him. I think you need to rest. We'll talk when you're calmer. He left quickly, but not before making a phone call in the yard. Although I couldn't hear the words, the tone was urgent, worried. That night, I received the most revealing message yet. They're coming together tomorrow. They're going to try to convince you that you're crazy, that grief is making you imagine things. Don't believe them. And don't take anything they offer you to drink or eat. The mysterious message's prediction came true exactly as warned. The next day, Julian and Leo arrived at my house together, accompanied by Genevieve. They wore expressions of exaggerated concern and carried a bag of pastries from the downtown bakery. "Mom, we're very worried about you," Julian began in a syrupy voice. "The neighbors have told us you've been acting strangely. Sadie says you've been talking to yourself, that you're not eating well." Sadie had never said that. It was another lie in their growing collection. "Genevieve brought your favorite pastries," Leo added, pointing to the bag. "And we made special coffee, from that brand you like so much." I remembered the words from the message. "Don't take anything they offer you to drink or eat." Was it possible they planned to poison me too, as they had done with Arthur? "Thank you, but I've already had breakfast," I told them, keeping my distance. "But Mom," Genevieve insisted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you need to eat well. You've lost so much weight since Arthur's passing." "I'm fine," I repeated firmly. Julian exchanged a significant look with Leo. It was the same look they had shared at the hospital when the doctor gave us Arthur's prognosis. "Mom," Julian said, sitting closer to me, "we want to talk to you about something important. Leo and I have been consulting with some doctors about your recent behavior." "My behavior?" "Yes. The strange questions you've been asking, the visits to the police station, this obsession with irrelevant details about Dad. It's normal after such a great loss, but it can be dangerous if not treated." Leo nodded gravely. "We spoke with Dr. Miller. He says it's common for older people to develop paranoia after losing a spouse, especially women your age." "Paranoia?" They were accusing me of being crazy for uncovering their lies. "I'm not paranoid," I told them with all the firmness I could muster. "I'm just asking questions I should have asked from the beginning." "Like what questions?" Julian challenged me. "Like why there's no police report of your father's supposed accident. Like why the shop is perfectly clean if there was an explosion. Like why you withdrew $12,000 from our account without telling me." The silence that followed was deafening. The three of them exchanged barely disguised looks of panic. "Mom," Leo finally said, "those things have simple explanations. Dad withdrew that money for repairs he wanted to do in secret, as a surprise for you." "What surprise?" "He wanted to remodel the house," Julian lied. "He had hired some workers to fix the roof, paint the walls. He wanted it to be a surprise for your birthday." If that were true, where were the workers? Where were the materials? Why did no one in town know about this supposed remodeling? "About the police report," Julian continued. "Not all workplace accidents require a report, especially when they happen on private property." More lies. Sergeant Miller had been very clear. Any workplace accident with serious injuries requires an official report. "Mom," Genevieve intervened in a sweet but condescending voice, "we just want to take care of you. That's why we think it would be best if you moved to a place where you have specialized medical care. A nursing home." "A specialized care home," Julian corrected, "for people going through complicated grief. They have psychologists, nurses, activities to keep you busy. And in the meantime," Leo added, "we can take care of selling the house, managing the insurance money, all those complicated things you shouldn't be handling in your current state." There it was, the complete plan. Declare me mentally incompetent, commit me to a nursing home, and take control of all my money. First, they had murdered Arthur for the insurance money, and now they wanted to rob me too. And if I refuse? I asked them. "Why would you refuse?" Julian asked with a smile that sent a chill down my spine. "We only want what's best for you. Because this is my house. I built my life with Arthur here. I raised you here." "Mom," Leo said with an exaggerated sigh, "you can't live in the past forever. Dad is gone. You have to accept it and move on." "I have accepted it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to give away my life and my money." The mask of concern began to crack on my sons' faces. Julian stood up abruptly. "Very well. If you won't listen to reason, we'll have to take more drastic measures." "What does that mean?" It means we can start a legal process to declare you mentally incompetent. We have witnesses to your erratic behavior. We have testimony from doctors who confirm you are suffering from senile paranoia. Doctors? What doctors? I hadn't spoken to any doctor about my mental state. Dr. Miller has already signed a preliminary report, Leo added. He says that based on our descriptions of your behavior, it's likely you need specialized care. A doctor who had never examined me had signed a report on my mental state based solely on what my sons had told him. How much had it cost them to buy that fake evaluation? So you can cooperate voluntarily, Julian continued. Or we can do it the legal way, but one way or another, you are going to get the help you need. It was a direct threat. If I didn't hand over my money voluntarily, they would use the legal system to steal it. I need time to think about it, I told them, trying to buy time. Of course, Genevieve said with her fake sweetness. But not too much time, for your own good. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, trembling with rage and fear. My own sons, my own flesh and blood, had not only murdered their father, but were now planning to steal everything I had left. That night, the phone vibrated with a message longer than the previous ones. Eleanor, my name is Vincent Hayes. I'm a private investigator. Arthur hired me 3 weeks before he died because he was suspicious of Julian and Leo. They poisoned him with methanol mixed into his breakfast coffee. I have recorded proof of their conversations, planning everything. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Go to the Hope Cafe. Sit at the table in the back. I'll be there. Finally, I would know who had been sending me those messages, and more importantly, I would have the evidence I needed to get justice for my husband's death. But I also knew I didn't have much time. Julian and Leo had shown their hand. If I didn't act fast, I would end up locked in a nursing home while they spent the money that had cost Arthur his life. The war had begun. And even though I was a 66-year-old woman against 2 ruthless men, I had something they didn't, the truth. And the truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to come to light. That night, for the first time since Arthur's death, I smiled, because I knew my husband had not died in vain. His caution, his instinct, his decision to hire a private investigator was going to allow me to get justice. Julian and Leo had gravely underestimated their mother. They were about to find out that a woman fighting for the memory of her murdered husband is a force more powerful than all their greed combined. The next day arrived, filled with nervousness and anticipation. I dressed carefully, choosing my most serious purple dress, the one I wore for important occasions. If I was going to meet the man who could give me the answers I needed, I wanted to be ready for any revelation. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I walked to the Hope Cafe with determined but cautious steps. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every person on the street could be a spy sent by my sons. The paranoia they accused me of having was starting to feel justified. The cafe was moderately full. I went straight to the back table, as instructed. I ordered a chamomile tea and waited, my hands trembling slightly on the worn wooden table. At exactly 3 o'clock, a man in his 50s approached my table. He was tall, with graying hair, intelligent eyes, and a serious but kind expression. He carried a brown folder under his arm. "Mrs. Eleanor?" he asked in a low voice. I nodded, not yet trusting my own voice. "I'm Vincent Hayes. I'm very sorry for your loss. Arthur was a good man." He sat across from me and placed the folder on the table. "Before I show you what I have, I need you to know that what you are about to hear and see will be very painful. Are you prepared?" "I've been preparing since I received your first message," I replied with a firmness I didn't know I possessed. Vincent opened the folder and took out a small recorder. "Arthur came to see me a month ago. He was worried about his son's behavior. He hired me to investigate them discreetly." He pressed the play button. Arthur's voice, so familiar and beloved, filled the small space between us. "Vincent, I need you to know that if anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Julian and Leo have been pressuring me to increase my life insurance policies. Yesterday, Julian brought me papers he said were to better protect Eleanor. But when I read them, I realized there were also clauses that benefited them directly. My heart raced. Hearing Arthur's voice was like having him back for a few minutes, but his words confirmed my worst suspicions. The recording continued. Leo has been asking strange questions about my daily routine. What I eat for breakfast, what time I leave the house, if Eleanor comes with me to the shop. He says it's out of concern, but something about the way he asks unsettles me. Vincent paused the recording. This conversation was 3 weeks before his death, but I have something more recent. He played another recording, this time with Julian's voice in the background, talking on the phone. No, we can't wait any longer. The old man is starting to get suspicious. Yesterday he asked me why I was so interested in his insurance. Yes, I already have the methanol. It works perfectly because the symptoms look like a heart attack or a stroke. No, Mom won't be a problem. After Dad dies, she'll be so devastated we'll be able to do whatever we want with her. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. It was my son's voice, my own son, coldly planning his father's murder. There's more, Vincent said softly. This recording is from the day before Arthur's death. A new recording began. This time it was Leo speaking to someone. Everything is ready. Tomorrow, Julian is going to put the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it was a special vitamin supplement a doctor recommended. The fool will drink it without suspecting a thing. The symptoms? It'll start with dizziness and confusion, then vision loss, seizures, a coma. The doctors will think it's a stroke or a heart attack. By the time they realize it's poisoning, it'll be too late. My world completely fell apart. Not only had they planned Arthur's murder, but they had executed it with a coldness that terrified me. How was it possible that my sons, the babies I had nursed, the children I had comforted during their nightmares, were capable of something so monstrous? How did you get these recordings? I asked between sobs. Arthur had asked me to place listening devices in his house, Vincent explained. He was scared, but he didn't know exactly of what. We placed them on the house, phone, and in a few other strategic locations. He took out a series of photographs from the folder. I also have this. Julian buying methanol at a hardware store 50 miles from town. He paid in cash and used a fake name, but I have him on video. The photos clearly showed Julian leaving a hardware store with a small bottle in his hands. The date on the photos was 5 days before Arthur's death. And this, Vincent continued, showing me more documents, are Julian's and Leo's financial movements over the last 6 months. They've been spending far more money than their incomes justify. Julian owes $70,000 to a loan shark in the city. Leo has gambling debts of $40,000. They were desperate. Everything began to make sense. It wasn't just greed that had motivated Arthur's murder. It was financial desperation. My sons were ruined and saw their father as an easy source of quick cash. Why didn't you go to the police immediately after Arthur's death? I asked him. Because Julian and Leo are very smart. They bribed the doctor who treated Arthur at the hospital to change the official diagnosis. Instead of poisoning, the death certificate says cardiac failure due to complications from a workplace accident. Without that medical evidence, my recordings might not be enough for a conviction. But now we have all the evidence together, I said, feeling a mix of pain and determination. Exactly. And there's something else you should know. Your sons were planning to kill you too. My blood ran cold. What? Vincent played one last recording, this time with Julian's and Leo's voices together. Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too, Julian was saying. We can't risk her getting suspicious or someone else putting ideas in her head. How? Leo asked. Same as with Dad. But this time we can make it look like a suicide from depression. A widow who can't live without her husband. No one would question it. And the money? We're her only heirs. Everything would be ours. The house, the savings, the insurance money. Almost $200,000 in total. The recording stopped. I was shaking uncontrollably. My sons had not only murdered their father, but they were planning to murder me as well. All for money, Mrs. Eleanor, Vincent told me gently. I know this is devastating, but we have enough evidence for them to pay for what they did. What should we do now? I asked, wiping my tears. First, we need to go to the police with all this evidence. Sergeant Miller is an honest man. He's not involved in any corruption. Second, we need to act fast. Your sons are planning to have you declared mentally incompetent tomorrow. If they succeed, it will be much harder to proceed legally. Tomorrow? Yes, I intercepted a phone conversation this morning. They are meeting with Judge Franklin at 10 o'clock in the morning to start the incompetency proceedings. I stood up from the table with a determination I hadn't felt in weeks. Then we have to act tonight. Exactly, Vincent confirmed. But before that, there's one more thing I want to show you. He took out one last photograph from the folder. In it, Arthur was seen leaving a medical clinic I didn't recognize. 3 days before he died, your husband went for a full medical checkup at a clinic in the city. The results show he was perfectly healthy. No signs of heart disease, normal blood pressure, everything perfect. This definitively proves that his death was caused by poisoning, not by natural health problems. That was the final piece of evidence we needed. Arthur had been a healthy man murdered by his own sons. Vincent, I said, taking his hand, thank you for fulfilling your promise to my husband. Now, let's get justice. That same evening, Vincent and I went straight to the police station. Sergeant Miller was working the night shift that week, which was perfect for our purposes. When we arrived, it was 8 o'clock in the evening, and the station was relatively quiet. Sergeant Miller, I said with a firm voice, I need to file a formal complaint for the murder of my husband, Arthur. The sergeant looked at me in surprise. Murder? Mrs. Eleanor, the death certificate states he died from cardiac complications after a workplace accident. The death certificate is fake, I replied, placing Vincent's folder on his desk. My husband was deliberately poisoned with methanol by our own sons. Over the next 2 hours, Vincent and I presented all the evidence. The audio recordings, the photographs of Julian buying methanol, the bank documents showing the unauthorized withdrawals, Arthur's medical results proving his perfect health, and finally, the recorded conversations where my sons confessed to both their father's murder and their plans to kill me. Sergeant Miller listened to each recording with an increasingly grave expression. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head in disbelief. This is monstrous, he muttered. Are you sure you want to proceed with this, Mrs. Eleanor? Once we arrest your sons, there's no going back. Sergeant, I replied with all the dignity I could muster. Those men murdered my husband in cold blood for money. They were planning to murder me too. They are no longer my sons. They are criminals who must pay for their crimes. We will need the medical examiner to exhume Arthur's body to confirm the presence of methanol, the sergeant explained. Are you prepared for that? Do whatever is necessary, I replied without hesitation. Sergeant Miller immediately called the district attorney. Despite the late hour, the severity of the case brought the DA to the station in person. After reviewing all the evidence, he immediately authorized the arrest warrants for Julian and Leo. We'll proceed at dawn, the DA explained. We need to secure all the evidence before they can destroy anything. Vincent walked me home that night. Are you sure you'll be okay alone? He asked with concern. I'll be fine, I replied. After everything I've discovered, I'm no longer afraid. I have justice on my side. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen, looking at the photographs of Arthur we had on the walls. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel only pain. I felt a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction, knowing that soon there would be justice for his murder. At 6 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Julian. Mom, I need you to come to Leo's house immediately. Something terrible has happened. What happened? I asked, feigning concern. It's better if I explain in person. Please, come quickly. I knew it was a trap. After hearing the recordings the night before, I knew they were planning to accelerate their plans to get rid of me. But I also knew the police were already on their way to arrest them. I'm on my way, I lied. Instead of going to Leo's house, I stayed in my kitchen, waiting. At 7:30 in the morning, I saw from my window several police cars heading in different directions toward my sons' houses. My phone rang repeatedly over the next hour. First Julian, then Leo, both with increasingly desperate voices asking where I was, but I didn't answer any calls. At 9 in the morning, Sergeant Miller knocked on my door. Mrs. Eleanor, we have arrested Julian and Leo. They are in police custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. I felt my legs tremble, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from relief. How did they react? I asked. Julian denied everything at first, but when we played the recordings for him, he broke down. Leo tried to flee through the back window of his house. We had to chase him for 6 blocks. That afternoon, Genevieve came to see me. She arrived crying, pleading, a completely different woman from the cold, calculating person I had known. "Miss Eleanor, please, you have to drop the charges against Julian. He's not a bad person, he was just desperate because of the debts. I pressured him so much to find money. This is my fault too." I looked at her without a shred of compassion. "Genevieve, your husband poisoned my husband. He was planning to murder me too. There is no explanation or justification for that." "But we're family," she cried desperately. "Think about what this will do to the family." "The family died the day they decided to kill Arthur for money," I replied coldly. "Now please leave my house." 3 days later, the exhumation of Arthur's body was carried out. The lab results confirmed exactly what Vincent had discovered: lethal levels of methanol in his system, enough to cause all the symptoms he had experienced before his death. The case became the talk of the town. No one could believe that 2 sons had murdered their own father for money. The local newspapers called it the cruelest crime of the decade. In the following weeks, more details came to light during the investigations. Julian did indeed owe $70,000 to illegal loan sharks who had started threatening him with violence. Leo had lost $45,000 in underground casinos and was also facing threats. They had seen Arthur's life insurance money as their only salvation, but their greed had led them to increase the policies so dramatically that they aroused their own father's suspicions. We also discovered that the doctor who had falsified the death certificate had received $5,000 in cash from Julian. He too was arrested for obstructing justice and falsifying official documents. Vincent explained all the details of the plan Arthur had made with him. "Your husband was smarter than his sons thought. He knew something bad was coming, but he didn't know exactly what. He hired me not just to investigate Julian and Leo, but also to protect you if anything happened to him." "He knew they were going to kill him?" I asked. "Not exactly, but he suspected their lives were in danger. That's why we installed the recording devices, why we documented everything. He wanted to make sure that if anything happened to him, the truth would come out. My Arthur, even in his final days, had been protecting me. He had anticipated our son's betrayal and had taken steps to ensure that justice would prevail. The trial was scheduled to begin in 2 months. Both Julian and Leo faced charges of first-degree murder, which in our state carried a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. The day of the trial arrived after 2 months of intense legal preparation. The courtroom was packed. Journalists from several regional newspapers had come to cover what was already known as the case of the murderous sons. The whole town was their neighbors, Arthur's former co-workers, even people I barely knew but who wanted to witness this historic moment of justice. I dressed in my best black dress, the same one I had worn at our wedding so many years ago, but which now represented mourning and dignity. Vincent accompanied me, sitting by my side throughout the entire process. His presence gave me the strength to face what would be the most difficult day of my life. Julian and Leo entered the courtroom in handcuffs, dressed in orange prison jumpsuits. Seeing my sons like that broke my heart once more, but I no longer felt pity for them. I only felt a deep sadness for the moral death they had chosen long before they physically murdered their father. The prosecutor presented the case with devastating precision. One by one, the recordings were played for the court. The silence was absolute each time Julian's and Leo's voices were heard, coldly planning Arthur's murder. When the prosecutor played the recording where they planned to kill me too, several people in the audience gasped in horror. An elderly woman stood up and left the courtroom crying. I couldn't blame her. It was hard to process such cruelty. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor said during his opening statement, "this is not an ordinary case of family greed. This is a case of cold, calculated premeditation, where 2 men decided to murder the father who had raised them with love and sacrifice, simply because they needed money to pay off their gambling debts and irresponsible loans. Julian's and Leo's lawyers tried to present a defense based on desperate circumstances and external influences, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings didn't lie. The bank documents didn't lie. The forensic evidence of methanol in Arthur's body didn't lie. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with trembling legs but a clear mind. I had waited for this moment for months. Mrs. Eleanor, the prosecutor asked me, "Can you tell us what your relationship with your sons was like before your husband's murder?" "I thought I had a good relationship with them," I replied, looking directly at Julian and Leo. "I raised them with love. I sacrificed everything for their well-being. Their father worked from sunup to sundown to give them the best we could. I never imagined that love and sacrifice would become the reason for our murder. At any point, did you suspect they might harm your husband?" "No. That's the most painful part of all of this. I trusted them completely. When they told me Arthur had an accident at his shop, I believed them. When they organized the funeral so quickly, I thought they were being efficient in their grief. I never imagined they were covering up a murder." Julian bowed his head during my testimony. Leo looked at me defiantly, but I saw tears in his eyes. Too late for tears. Too late for regret. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when the prosecutor decided to play the full recording of the conversation where they planned my own murder. Julian's voice filled the courtroom. "Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too. We can't risk her getting suspicious." A murmur of horror swept through the audience. Several people turned to look at me with expressions of disbelief and compassion. "How did you feel when you heard this recording for the first time?" the prosecutor asked me. "I realized that I had lost both of my sons long before I lost my husband," I answered, my voice breaking but firm. "The babies I nursed, the children I comforted during their nightmares, had died and been replaced by two strangers capable of any cruelty for money." The defense tried to cross-examine me, suggesting that perhaps I had misinterpreted my son's intentions, that perhaps grief had made me exaggerate the evidence. But the recordings spoke for themselves. Vincent also testified, explaining in detail how Arthur had hired him because he was afraid of his own sons. He described every step of the investigation, every piece of evidence collected, every recorded moment that revealed the truth. The medical examiner presented the results of the exhumation, confirming the lethal presence of methanol in Arthur's body. He explained how this poison acts slowly, causing exactly the symptoms my husband had experienced before he died. After 3 days of devastating testimony, the closing arguments arrived. The prosecutor was relentless. "Julian and Leo are not victims of circumstance. They are predators who saw their own parents as financial obstacles to be eliminated. They planned, executed, and covered up Arthur's murder, and they were planning to do the same to Eleanor. They do not deserve compassion. They deserve justice." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. I could hear my own heart beating as the foreman read the verdict. In the case of the state versus Julian and Leo Sterling, on the charge of first-degree murder of Arthur Sterling, we find the defendants guilty. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Julian collapsed in his chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. Leo remained rigid, staring straight ahead without expression. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Eleanor Sterling, we find the defendants guilty. The judge proceeded immediately to sentencing. "Julian and Leo Sterling, for the premeditated murder of your father and the conspiracy to murder your mother, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." When I heard those words, I felt a gigantic weight lift from my shoulders. Justice. There was finally justice for Arthur. After the trial, many people came up to hug me and express their support. Sadie cried with me, not from sadness but from relief. "Eleanor, Arthur can rest in peace now," she whispered. That night, I returned to my house, which now felt different. It was no longer a place of pain and betrayal. It was my home again, the place where Arthur and I had been happy for 42 years. Vincent came to visit me a week after the trial. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "At peace," I answered honestly. "For the first time since Arthur's death, I sleep peacefully. I know he is resting because his death did not go unpunished. And the money? The insurance? The savings? I donated the life insurance money to a foundation for victims of family crimes," I explained. "That money was stained with blood. I could never have used it. My personal savings are enough for me to live modestly for the rest of my days." 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from prison. It was from Julian. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret everything. The money, The debts, the desperation blinded us. We lost all humanity. Leo and I destroyed the most loving family in the world for $125,000 that we never even got to enjoy. I will take my own life in my cell tomorrow. I can't live with what we did. Take care, Mom. Tell Dad we're sorry we were such bad sons. I wasn't in time to prevent his suicide. Julian was found hanging in his cell the next day. Leo, upon hearing of his brother's death, suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was transferred to the prison's psychiatric hospital. Today, 2 years after the trial, I live quietly in my small house. I have turned Arthur's shop into a garden where I grow flowers that I take to his grave every Sunday. Vincent has become a close friend, visiting me regularly to make sure I'm okay. Sometimes, neighbors ask if I miss my sons. The answer is complicated. I miss the children they once were, but those children died long before Arthur did. The men they became were not my sons. They were strangers who shared my blood, but not my heart. I have learned that true family is not defined by blood, but by love, loyalty, and mutual respect. Arthur was my true family for 42 years. The friends who supported me during the trial are my family now. Justice didn't bring Arthur back, but it brought me peace. And on quiet nights, when I sit on the porch where we so often had coffee together, I swear I can feel his presence, proud of me for being strong enough to do the right thing, even when it meant losing my sons forever. 5 years have passed since that terrible day at the cemetery when I received the first message that changed my life forever. Today, I am 71 years old, and my completely white hair reflects all the storms I have faced and overcome. But my eyes, as my dear friend Sadie tells me, shine with a peace they didn't have before. The house where Arthur and I built our dreams is still my sanctuary. I've made some improvements with the money I had saved, painted the walls a soft yellow, Arthur's favorite color, and turned his old workshop into the most beautiful garden in the neighborhood. Red roses, white carnations, sunflowers that always seek the sun, just as he taught me to do during our toughest years. Vincent Hayes became more than the investigator who helped me get justice. He became my chosen family. He visits me every Wednesday afternoon, and we drink coffee on the porch while he tells me stories about his other cases. Sometimes he asks if I regret reporting my own sons, if it wouldn't have been better to keep the secret and live with the lie. Never, I always reply. The truth hurts, but lies kill the soul. The foundation I established with the life insurance money has become something bigger than I ever imagined. The Arthur Sterling Foundation for Victims of Familial Crimes now helps dozens of families each year who have gone through tragedies similar to mine. We have psychologists, lawyers, private investigators all working so that no other family has to suffer in silence what I suffered. 6 months ago, a 40-year-old woman came to see me. Her name was Helen, and she suspected that her brother had murdered their mother for the inheritance. Her story was painfully similar to mine: greedy relatives, pressure to sell property, strange behavior after the death. The foundation provided her with a private investigator, free legal advice, and psychological support throughout the entire process. When her brother was convicted of murder 3 months later, Helen came to hug me, crying, "Mrs. Eleanor, you saved my life. If you hadn't had the courage to report your own sons, I never would have had the courage to report mine." Those are the moments that remind me why all the pain I went through was worth it. Leo is still alive, though he is no longer the same man I knew. After Julian's suicide, his mind completely broke. The doctors say he lives in a constant state of guilt and paranoia, believing that Arthur comes to visit him every night to condemn him for the murder. He has tried to take his own life 3 times, but the prison guards keep him under constant watch. I receive letters from him occasionally. They are incoherent, filled with desperate apologies and pleas for forgiveness. At first, I read them, looking for some trace of the son I raised with so much love. But then I realized that reading those letters only reopened wounds that had already healed. Now, I keep them unopened in a shoebox. Maybe someday I'll read them, maybe not. I have the right to protect my peace of mind. Genevieve disappeared from town immediately after the trial. Someone told me she moved to the city and changed her name. I don't blame her. Carrying the last name of a murderer can't be easy. Sometimes I wonder if she knew what Julian was planning, if she was a silent accomplice in Arthur's murder. But those questions belong to the past, and I have learned to live in the present. The town of Harmony Creek will never forget the case. It has become a local legend, a story that parents tell their children as a warning about greed and betrayal. Some see me as a hero, others as a cruel woman who sent her own sons to prison. I don't care what they think. I know the truth, and the truth has given me the peace I needed. My health has remained surprisingly good for my age. The doctor says it's because I was finally able to free myself from the stress and sadness I was carrying. The body heals when the heart finds peace, he explained during my last checkup. Sunday mornings are my favorite. I cut fresh flowers from my garden and walk to the cemetery to visit Arthur's grave. His headstone now has an inscription I had engraved after the trial. Arthur Sterling, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. His love was stronger than his death. I tell him everything that has happened during the week. I talk about the foundation, about the families we've helped, about the thank you letters I received from people who found justice thanks to our story. I swear I can feel his approval in the wind that rustles the leaves of the nearby trees. You know what's strangest, my love? I said during my last visit. I no longer feel pain when I think of Julian and Leo. I only feel pity. Pity because they had all the love in the world and they chose hate. They had a family that adored them and they chose betrayal. They had the chance to be honorable men like you, and they chose to be murderers. Last week, a reporter from the city came to interview me for a documentary on family crimes. She asked if there was anything I would like to say to other people who might be going through similar situations. Family is not an excuse for crime, I replied. Love is not blind. Love with boundaries is true love. If someone who claims to love you is capable of harming you for money or convenience, that person does not truly love you. And it is never, ever too late to seek justice, no matter who the culprit island. This year, on the 5th anniversary of Arthur's death, I organized a special ceremony in his memory. More than 200 people came, neighbors, members of the foundation, families we have helped, local officials. It was beautiful to see how his death, which began as a tragedy, had become a force for good in so many lives. Vincent gave a moving speech. Arthur Sterling died because of his son's greed, but his legacy lives on in every family that finds justice thanks to his wife's courage. Evil tried to destroy their story, but good turned it into hope for others. At night, before I go to sleep, I sometimes take out the old photographs of when Julian and Leo were children. I see them playing in the yard, hugging their father, laughing with me on past Christmases. I allow myself to cry for those innocent children who once existed, before greed corrupted them completely. But I no longer cry for the men they became. Those men chose their destiny. My story ended up being bigger than my personal tragedy. It has become a symbol that justice is possible, even when it comes from the most unexpected sources. A 66-year-old widow proved that truth is more powerful than lies, that true love is stronger than betrayal, and that it is never too late to do the right thing. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and Vincent will come for coffee, as always. I'll make him his favorite cake and tell him about the thank you letters that arrived this week. Afterwards, we'll work together in the garden, planting new flowers for the spring. Life goes on, simpler but more authentic than before. I have learned that true family isn't about shared blood, but shared values, mutual respect, love that never turns to harm. Arthur, wherever you are, I hope you know that I kept the promise I made to you beside your grave that terrible day. I found the truth. I sought justice, and I turned our pain into hope for others. Your death was not in vain, my love. It will never be in vain.